And I know you want to hear from the startups, but just before we do that, we have I'm really excited to host a fireside chat with two C2V alumni and discuss a little bit the lessons learned from scaling. So it's my pleasure to introduce Brian Asparro and Apoorv Sinha from CarbonQuest and Carbon Upcycling. So Brian, Apoorv, please come on the stage. All right, that's good. I'm going to change of setting. I needed to sit a little bit.
Where's the fire?
Yeah, I mean, let's just add the fire on the TV right here. So it's really always a pleasure to reconnect with C2V alumni. CarbonQuest, Brian, you were in part of the first cohort. In fact, it was our hybrid COVID cohort, so special cohort. And Carbon Upcycling, Apoorv, you were part of the year 2 to 2022. A lot of time passed, and so maybe we can start by just discussing, since you were part of the cohort, what has changed the most for you in 60, 90 seconds, and maybe we can start with you, Apoorv.
Yeah, thanks, Frederic, and good to see you finally in person. I think it's been a long time since we've been involved with this, and our team has definitely changed a lot. I think it's almost easier to answer your question by talking about what is what has actually stayed the same, because it feels like almost the entire ecosystem has evolved quite radically since we participated in 2022. I think primarily, I would say we've seen the macro environment that we're in kind of trickle down, and especially for companies like ours and CarbonQuest as an example, I think some of the more mature companies in our ecosystem, I think what we're seeing is that the definition of what we considered product market fit has changed quite a bit. And essentially, people are now looking more so than ever, maybe especially compared to 2 years ago, at kind of a carbon plus value proposition. And I would say the plus is almost magnified. Like you have to have a value prop that can be resilient through whatever changes we see in the ecosystem and the different kind of dynamics we're seeing with incentives and headwinds, and really be able to show that we'll be able to have kind of the staying power to come back to where I think there's long-term consensus that in 5 years, a lot of the companies that you had the logos of Frederic up a few slides ago, I think there's a lot of belief, even with people that aren't necessarily climate change believers, that these are companies that are probably going to look really, really good in a few years. But it's about how do you get through that extended valley of potential headwinds, I think.
Yeah, and I like the carbon plus because it should have been there the whole time, really, and the value prop cannot be only about carbon reduction. And so I think, if anything, it's a good reminder for us who have focused too much on the net zero to find an economic case and a real value prop in the market. How about you, Brian?
Just before I do, if we quickly, just by a show of hands, how many people in the audience are focused on the technology side of climate tech? How many on deployment? Investing? Anything else? So it's pretty diverse. There is an ecosystem, exactly as you were saying, Apoorv, and I love the plus moniker. And as Frederic said, we were involved in the very first cohort of carbon to value, and I think since we really shouldn't be here based on the numbers, right? I mean, most startups fail, but yet still, what was it, 80+% of the companies that started in this program are still here. So what we were able to do when we first entered the program, we had our first technology demonstration of our point source carbon capture technology in a building in New York. And we took from there a view towards raising some capital to then further prove out our demonstration further, which we were able to do at a number of sites here in New York to ultimately collect CO2 and ship it to a concrete block manufacturer in Brooklyn. That's where we started to think about exactly product market fit. And at the same time, it's when the market started moving from our original thesis of sustainability and compliance, or utilizing carbon capture for sustainability and compliance, and more to an economic positioning. And that's hard to swallow. It's hard to swallow when you start looking at something that should be called the green premium. And I think the question, is the green premium dead? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It's not that simple. But we focused a lot of our effort on economics. I'll explain a little bit more later. But we now have a little over a dozen of our systems that are operating or in contract, and starting to focus more on what that scale-up type story looks like. Ultimately, the C2V program helped us through relationships, through information, through just positioning and thinking about how we might scale our overall operations, and I think it was very helpful to us as a company.
Yeah, and I think, Brian, you've been one of those who've been really keeping in touch over the years and really active participant in the ecosystem. Really appreciate that. And really, from 1 system to 12 system is not a lot of companies have done that in 4 years or so. So really congratulations, and excited and about the Series A also last year. Apoorv, I know when you joined the program, I think you had the XPRIZE pilots plant running, or maybe troubleshooting, I'm not sure. But I'm curious, and now you've gone nowhere. You've built a first commercial system at the Ash Grove plant. And so I think for the founders here in the room, what are the challenges from like a scale-up journey that you experience from lab scale partnership to like a full-scale commercial program?
Yeah, it's a lot of layers to answer that question. It's a profound one, because I think, what you're doing at CarbonQuest versus, for example, us on the industrial side of things with carbon upcycling, I think we're at very kind of opposite ends of the spectrum with regards to scale and the deployment strategy. So just for people in the room that don't know about carbon upcycling, we're a building materials company. And we're essentially helping cement companies take local waste materials from steel making, from mining, from residual decommissioned coal power plants. And essentially the idea is to be able to take those waste materials, activate them with carbon dioxide that you can get from a point source emission, and then create a lower carbon blended cement. So overall, the core value proposition of our tech, I think going back all the way to the XPRIZE, where we started competing in 2019, was always that our technology allows for the adoption of the technology right at the cement plant. So all of the cement in the world is made from less than 2,500 cement plants in the world. So it's very centralized. And we make 4 billion tons roughly of cement every year across the world. So the idea is that if you have a technology that can plug in right at that hub, then it can trickle through the rest of the supply chain fairly seamlessly. So that was kind of the core value proposition. And I think when we participated in C2V in the second cohort, Fluor, I think, was the sponsor at the time. And we were very much in this place where we had 2 demo scale facilities running in Calgary in Canada, where we're headquartered. And essentially what we were able to show at the time was that the core tech works, but we didn't know if it works efficiently enough. We didn't know if if the unit economics and kind of the principal kind of design metrics that we were designing our plant around were going to pencil from an economic perspective. And so that is at a test center in Calgary. If you guys ever are out in Western Canada, we'd be happy to host. And we still run those facilities right now, because we want to show people that this is not just something in the lab. This is actually an industrial scale facility. But I think the real transition for us actually did happen exactly in that year that we were participating in C2V, because we got a local cement company in Canada. It's actually a European conglomerate called CRH, but they took a bet with us, and they said, based on what they saw at the pilot, they wanted to move ahead and look at essentially a scope where we could bolt on our next unit, which would be a full-scale commercial unit, right at one of their cement plants. So show the integration wasn't just theoretical, it could actually happen in practice. And that plant, as Frederic mentioned, is pretty much done with construction. That's supposed to go online sometime in the fall this year and sequester about 3,000 to 4,000 tons of CO2 directly from a cement plant stack, and help them create about 30,000 to 34,000 tons of cementitious material that they can use to displace otherwise limestone-based clinker. So the idea there, again, like going back to that carbon plus point, is that what we were able to sell the cement company on is that there was a huge amount of midterm and long-term upside with carbon pricing and some of the regulatory frameworks that are existing in Canada, and might sound a little bit rough compared to the ecosystem in the US right now, but the carbon pricing mechanism in Canada is still very early but robust. There hasn't been kind of a big change in kind of direction. But even at that point, the cement company was very pragmatic. Like their operating units, their business unit did not really, there's a lot of people at the plant level who don't really believe in, a few things. And so they had to believe that this was going to make their life simpler. And so what we consistently learned from that experience was that you kind of have to sell two different things depending on who your audience is. At the corporate level, at the strategic board level, executives, I think there's a huge amount of buy-in that something has to happen on carbon reduction and sustainability and getting to net zero, or at least circularity. Whereas at the operating level, I think it's more about, we have old equipment. If you can help us get more capital and if you can help us be more efficient with our unit economics, then that's kind of the dual kind of sell that we had to go through with. And frankly, we've been able to see the other side of it.
It's a good one because you often get stuck at the strategy level and you forget the operational constraints. How about you, Brian? I know like you deployed systems and it's all exciting on a PowerPoint, and then you have to actually bring equipment into a building, and it's like probably painful. So what did you learn from like these deployments that you couldn't learn from a PowerPoint or like a pilot project?
So on a commercialization standpoint, when we first started the company, for part of our thesis, we looked at roughly in the US, about 20% of emissions in buildings comes from on-site natural gas usage, steam boilers, combined heat and power, industrial facilities as well. And what entering carbon capture as an opportunity for helping to reduce emissions cost effectively. That's why we started off here in New York. I suspect a lot of folks here are familiar with a buildings law called Local Law 97, and focused on how we can utilize carbon capture in buildings as part of our approach to commercialization. What we learned through that, kind of as we were going through carbon to value, which we knew anyway, is we're installing a piece of infrastructure, call it middle infrastructure, that's expected to be operating for multiple years, 10 to 15 to 20 years. And so just to your point, Apoorv, there's multiple people that we have to settle. And so in our kind of matrix internally, we look at 3 different buyers at our customer: the economic buyer, the user buyer, and then the technical buyer. And based on that, I think we were getting feedback that the economics based on the reductions or the potential policy implications that might swing over years didn't make people as comfortable to move forward. And so I know we'll talk about pivots in a minute. The hard part with a small company is when do you say we made a mistake or we're not really on the right trajectory? Because you can convince yourself, you already convinced yourself to start the company. That's one. Number 2 is saying the reason why I started the company isn't the reason I should be moving forward, right? That's hard. I'm sure a lot of people in the room have felt this. And it's somewhat directional sometimes. It's not binary. So what we did is we installed a number of systems that created economic value. And what we learned is how operators think, how the users think, how the economic value customers think. And then we started to focus our effort in removing some of those barriers, kind of peeling the onion, piece by piece, focusing on financing to remove some of the financing risk, carbon capture as a service, focusing on how do we really dial in our technology, make it easy to install so that it doesn't create a lot of risk for the operator. And then ultimately, from a emission standpoint, from a user standpoint, how does this help them meet their objectives, or does it remove it altogether and just becomes an economic scenario? So those are a few things that we did on a commercialization side that we focused on.
I like the hacks. That's good. I want to go into like partnerships and capital, and Apoorv, you talked a little bit about like how to navigate, corporate buyers. I don't know if there's anything you want to add in the context of like approaching cement companies and how you qualify them and what makes good partners. Anything you would add?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I think that's been one of our, I guess, key advantages that we've had for a few years now, where we've been able to get engagement from some of the large cement companies. And I think to your point about the product market fit, Brian, like we had their perspectives early on, which was really helpful. So just for context, we have 3 of the 10 largest cement companies in the Western world, like outside of China, on our cap table. And one of them started actually right when C2V was launched in 2021. Like we had one of them just pre-COVID. I still remember this was like a week before the lockdown. And there was a group from Spain that flew in. And literally a day later, they had like all of Alberta was shut down because of the COVID pandemic. But it was a telling kind of episode for us because that triggered, it was Cemex who led that work with us. And since then, a lot of these corporate groups in cement have started venture arms, and these venture arms have made kind of initial investments into companies that they feel would have a strategic benefit to their asset base over a period of time. And I think apart from, obviously, we as startups kind of focus a lot on financing and kind of, making sure that we don't run out of money, and rightfully so. But I think the other piece that it helped us with was for some of these cement companies to get engaged with us early meant that we could never kind of veer too far away from the feedback that they were giving us on a very regular basis. So, you mentioned Ash Grove earlier, Frederic. I mean, they are our anchor customer in the sense that, our plant is built there. We've deployed capital in a patch of land that they've leased to us, and we're integrated with their operations. So we talk to their plant manager, their QC manager, like on a weekly basis. And that allowed us to kind of always have this bigger perspective in play. And it's definitely, I would say, like a major difference between now and Clean Tech 1.0 is the amount of engagement that you've had from strategics, not just in cement, but also in steel, in fuels, just coming over to the naval yard. Like I ran past an Amegy truck, and I know what type of, partnerships they've been able to build in the shipping and the marine industry. And I think that's probably one thing I would highly recommend as much as possible. Strategics do carry a lot of value, and I think there's a lot of kind of sweat equity, I suppose, that they bring to the table. And as much as possible to have them in the fray early, I think would be something I would highly recommend.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and it's part of the core teas of C2V. On the capital, Brian, kind of 2 questions, so you can pick the one. But, you raised Series A last year, so I don't know if you have any lessons learned from that round. But you also mentioned, like, the capture as a service and sort of the finance deal that you had for project finance, I think. So you can pick which one you want to talk about, but I think both could be interesting.
Yeah, so from a capitalization standpoint, and I couldn't agree more about bringing the right either investor partners or commercial partners in either to the cap table or as advisors. We, I guess, bootstrapped until we got some proof points, and then wanted to start to grow both our commercial development and technology development. And we went out for a Series A, and the few lessons that we learned at the time, this was about late 2004, early 2024, early 2025, the market was starting to soften a bit, and we were really trying to target those that were focused in decarbonization, but we really weren't hitting the right type of investor. So what ends up happening quite often is it's like playing poker. Everybody wants the turn. Give me your your deck, your information. I probably have no interest in making this investment, but I want to see, and maybe I could pass to somebody else. That just wastes time. Time is a killer in anything, but it's a big killer in startups. We started to get smarter about where we focused, and we focused a lot of our attention on those that were really focused in carbon capture, technology, natural gas, And then ultimately that helped us close our round. Our lead is a group called Riverbend Energy Group in Houston, and we have 2 co-investors, one Energy Capital Ventures and another Aligned Climate Capital, which really helped us round out some of the support that we needed, not only for investing and developing our company, but the focus that we are starting to go to now from our product market fit. And so we've gotten a number of introductions and customers through that whole process. So really trying to lean in on the customers, the partners that you mentioned, Apoorv, is really key in our evolution.
Great. I want to talk a little bit about the founder journey, because obviously starting a company is about the people, and it can be lonely and can be very difficult. And having you on stage is pretty unique opportunity. So Apoorv, I know you started the company, co-founder, probably with like 2 or 3 people, and now I don't know how many you are, but like you're a pretty big group. You made big hires, CEO, CFO, with very, very big expertise and like experience. So I want to know a little bit about how your role evolved over time, and when did you know it was the right time to make those hires, and maybe if you have any personal belief that has changed, have you seen the company matured?
Yeah. I mean, I was looking at this over the holidays in December actually, and like this is my 12th year at Carbon Upcycling, which just sounds insane because similar to what you said, Brian, like we bootstrapped for a while. We actually didn't raise any venture capital money till just about 3.5 years ago. So we did a lot of our evolution in terms of taking the technology from the lab, doing a lot of third-party kind of validation work with universities, trying to leverage as much as we could, like non-dilutive support from the government programs and things like that. And then finally, I think it was right around the end of the X Prize that we said like we had enough to really be able to show traction and go out and raise venture. And that has, I would say, more than anything, I think the pace and the philosophy of venture capital was I would say, a pivotal moment in kind of my exposure and my perspective on the world, because you're dealing with different time horizons. When you're just dealing with researchers, everything happens at the time scale of master's students, PhD students, or postdocs that have a term to finish. And so a lot of what you need to do with product market fit and recycling capital and getting it to work is kind of lost on early stage founders. And I think to your point, Frederic, I started Carbon Upcycling with 2 other founders who gave us some seed capital. They were significantly more advanced in their career than I was. They put some seed capital in, and one of them is still on our board today. So we still have this kind of founder perspective that is pretty active at the board level, which I think is extremely important. But I think to your point about transitions and looking at skill sets, I think what became very clear to us, and I'd be curious, Brian, how it was for you, given you have kind of a more fragmented, kind of decentralized model for how you deploy your tech. But for us, it was clear from, I would say, very, very early, like when we did our seed round in 2022, that we had to go to major cement players and get them to deploy hundreds of millions of dollars of capital. And so they had to take very large risks with capital that was going to have a lifetime of 30, 40, 50 years, right? The average age of a cement plant in the US and Canada, just for perspective, is about 57 years old. So, these plants run forever, right? And then once they're amortized, they just print cash. And so now if you go to them and say, hey, I have a new way of making cement, they're like, well, what do I do with this stranded asset and stuff, right? So, which is a very tough sell in any industry. So I think from our perspective, I think the realization for me was that if we're going to start raising significant amounts of capital, like $200, $300 million. I think to what you said in your intro comments, Fred, like we have been lucky that even since the market turned about 1.5 years ago, we've been able to raise $28 million. Some of it even through debt, which we thought was a massive milestone for us. But what we realized was we needed to get the expertise in, which had the corporate background and understood from the client's perspective how they wanted to deploy this capital and how they underwrite these kind of investments from their side. And so I took on just earlier this year in January the role of president, where I've been very much focused on the part that I find the most exciting, which is the vision, looking at the external stakeholders and kind of aligning people from a mission perspective, But then when it comes to tactical execution of what we need to do to build up the next 2 years of pipeline of projects, I think bringing in the expertise that we have with our CEO and CFO has been profoundly different and I think quite positive. And maybe the last thing I'd say is, I think for me personally, I think what it's made me realize is, we talk a lot about the evolving kind of world around us, but I think the realization that came at the board level and at the leadership management level was that similar evolution needs to happen internally as well, right? And it's not to say that, out with the old and in with the new kind of thing. You have to kind of mesh the two together because there are weaknesses and strengths in both areas. And candidly, that's an area that we're still trying to figure out, like what is the right balance of, kind of strategizing and tactical kind of maneuvering. But it's a good problem to have. I think any company that, looks the same as it did 3 years ago is probably stagnating. And so from our perspective, I think kind of taking that in our stride individually as well as a team has been a huge part of our growth in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and I think from the outside, it feels like you've been proactively making the change and not like reactively, which is really cool to see. And
it's always a bit of both. It's never black and white.
It always looks better on the outside and from the inside, obviously. Brian, this is your third startup, I think, and you have 2 successful exits before CarbonQuest. And so I'm just curious if there's any kind of lessons learned that you want to share as a CEO, like, COO from CarbonQuest. Any nuggets, that you would share with the founders here?
One thing I failed to mention, and I'll come back to it. The other thing in raising money that we learned, especially with hard tech, is it takes time. Certainly if you're building an AI agent or something like that, the cycles are very quick these days, it seems at least. With hard tech, it takes years. So getting the right partners involved that look at a long-term vision is key, at least in our case, and it's hard. It's not always the case. People get impatient. Everyone's got a master somewhere, and they're looking to get that return so that they can make money. And I didn't mention that, but that's a really key thing when we were going out to look for capital, because the development cycles are long, just like you were mentioning as well. From a journey of startups, I think what I've done this a few times previously, more on the power side, getting involved in solar and storage, and another company in storage. And the thing that sticks in my head is when we were involved with energy storage in 2010, the amount of people who told us we had a ridiculously crazy, stupid idea was enormous. If those people were in the room right now, it'd be pretty crazy with the amount of storage that's coming online and all that. And this was 15 years ago. We were also looking at, we probably have them somewhere, I probably shouldn't have it, but a PO for battery modules at $1,300 per kilowatt hour. $1,300 per kilowatt hour. Anyone who's following this industry right now, maybe it's $150, $200, $100 per kilowatt hour. The cost down, and we've seen this in solar, we've seen it in wind, it's happening in climate tech as well, or carbon to value. It's hard. We got to keep pushing, right? And some of what I've learned in startups is you just got to keep pushing, and momentum is really key, because there's a lot of potential external actors or things that go against you policy-wise or finance-wise or customer-wise, and so you got to be smart about how you set things up. But it sometimes just comes down to what is it, perseverance or perspiration over focusing on the things that are in a strategy doc. That said, at CarbonQuest specifically, we've kind of gone through a similar journey, kind of what you mentioned, Apoorv, in a way of just bootstrapping, moving things forward, and just getting different touch points, proof points. We're still not where we want to be. Our view and our hope is that there's a world where we have a low-cost capture system that could be utilized in many places to decarbonize or be utilized in other carbon to value type approaches. And so that leads to sustainability on a cost-effective manner. So probably a very high-level comment and statement, but that's my view on the startup journey.
Very encouraging because obviously it's very hard. You want to give up, and so you don't give up, and it takes 13 years before you don't be called crazy. So that's good benchmark to know is the energy storage one. It was the same with solar, for sure. We're running a little bit out of time, but maybe in 30 seconds you can comment on what is your biggest bottleneck and how may the room help you. So we can start with you, Apoorv.
Yeah, I would say where we are right now, as I mentioned earlier and Frederic alluded to, we're building our first of a kind commercial facility as we speak. That facility goes online in the fall of this year, potentially late summer. And what we've generally found is all heavy industry, exactly like piggybacking off the point that you made, they tend to be kind of slow movers at the best of times. But when there are these macroeconomic uncertainties around the ecosystem, like in every which way, I think they tend to find even more reason to slow down. And I think what we've generally found, and I would consider our biggest bottleneck right now, would be showing that there is system-wide support for this kind of solution. And I think there's a lot of work that is happening with data centers, with hyperscalers around procurement of, showing these market signals. They may or may not involve a green premium, but at the very least they involve some recognition that doing things better is something that people value. And I think that kind of support is something that we're very keen on. And I think the second thing is we've seen a big transition in the last year or two on switching from pure play kind of equity at the topco level to project financing, like more complex project stacks, so that this capital is coming in different flavors. And I think that's another area where there needs to be an unlock, not just for carbon upcycling, but I would say across the board, because any type of capex right now, if it's happening with something that we saw with SAF as an example, or some of these carbon to fuels plays where there was a huge amount of topco equity raised, and hydrogen as well. I think that's probably not going to be the norm for the next couple of years. So if instead there's a way to pull together an ecosystem of capital where, or a stack which is more diverse and reduces the amount of exposure that the topco equity people have, I think that's another area. Market signals and financing structures are probably the two areas that we're spending a lot of time on. I'm spending a lot of time on, and would love to connect with anybody. And just one last thing I'll say, just for founders in the room, one big lesson, I was thinking about this after I finished answering your question, but one thing I've really reflected on and would love to talk about with anybody who's interested is that balance of, listening to advice when you get it and also trusting your gut. And there's a very fine balance there, but it can have very, very different outcomes if you kind of veer one way or the other by a few percentage points. So I think that's one thing I'm getting more comfortable with, and I'd love to talk to you offline about how you've been dealing with that as well.
Enough drinks to talk about this after.
Yeah.
How about you, Brian? Bottleneck and asks for the room.
I think it's very similar. Some of it is the signals. Since we have a point source carbon capture technology that we deploy at facilities, the signals where that ultimately adds value, either it's policy, compliance, et cetera. And what that's kind of done for us is we forced a lot of our go-to-market in the food and beverage space. We've done it a lot in the renewable natural gas space right now, because those are where the signals are strongest. Coupled with that would be when we produce CO2, we are providing it to a utilization party. And a lot of that, what we do today, we will sell it into the merchant market, which is a multi-billion-dollar market for industrial-based CO2. Not because we want to become an industrial gas player, but because it's our quickest path to demonstrating the technology to get costs down, as I mentioned earlier. The more folks here in this room, or folks that that have utilization technologies that you're looking to deploy, and you're seeking low-cost CO2 that might be located in a certain location and has a good CI score or a certain type of CI score, sustainability quotient, we'd like to hear about it, because we're constantly coming up with opportunities and we're looking for partners on the other side. And insofar as there's folks out there that we can further partner with, that would just add more value to both sides of the equation and ultimately the end customer too.
Amazing. Well, that's all time we had for, but thank you very much, and please give them a round of applause. Thank you.